So I have my lining and my self bodice pinned together from the underarm all the way. So start at the underarm, pin all the way around. And up here at the shoulder seam, I'm gonna need to pivot. And so I had taken my pins out so that I could clip that notch where I stopped sewing the shoulder seam, and just to make it deeper. So as I'm sewing, I'm going to keep this 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then when I get to this intersection, I'm going to need to move things out of the way, and then I'm going to get into that seam. I'm going to sink my needle and I'm going to pivot and then keep sewing all the way around. So I just don't want to catch this seam allowance right here because it will not allow my that little intersection right there to look nice. So let's go ahead and sew this. Pull up my chair. So my pressing on my dart got a little weird. So I'm gonna pin that. Actually, no, I don't even have to sew that, so I'll just fix it later. So 1/2 inch seam allowance, regular stitch. Well, 1/2 inch seam allowance because that's what I put on my pattern. You do whatever you put on your pattern. So regular stitch, back stitch where you start and stop. Pull out your pins before you sew over them. And I'm feeling to make sure that all this stuff that I have inside here is out of my way as I'm sewing, and I'm only sewing through 2 layers of fabric and not more. And then as I approach this corner right here, where the armhole turns into the sleeve, I'm gonna get my needle parallel with that peak and sink my needle and then pivot. So it looks like I need to go a couple more stitches because this edge right here, it's not lining up with the 1/2 inch mark on my throat plate yet. So I'll keep going this way. So there's one more stitch. Does that get me there? Looks like I need one more. There I go. So this is where I have to be careful. I only want to be catching 2 layers. So I'm just making sure everybody's where they should be. Right up to where I ended my shoulder seam. And I'm still only through 2 layers. And then I'm gonna flip all my seam allowance around my needle and make sure that my seam allowance is flat underneath my foot. And I'm just pivoting. Holding everybody down flat. Get that shoulder seam allowance out of the way of the needle. So if you end up catching any of that, you'll see it when you go to turn it right side out. And you'll just want to take a stitch or two out, and then you might need to clip more seam allowance to make sure you don't catch it when you go back in to fix it by securing those stitches so that you don't have a hole. So you take a couple stitches out to release the seam allowance, and then clip what you need to clip, and then go back in and sew the stitches that you took out. So make sure, nope, still need to go a few more stitches. There we go. Take a lever all the way up to its highest position, and then we're ready.